Washington Dulles Airport, and the mood during the flight. Eero Saarinen was a 20th-century design genius. He passed away at the age of just 51, in the prime of his career. Saarinen never lived to see the official opening of one of his most inspiring projects, Washington Dulles International Airport. And perhaps that was for the best, given how things turned out in the end. The main terminal concept, with its sweeping curves and no internal columns, was designed to resemble an airplane wing, and it still looks iconic 60 years later. Unfortunately, the landmark building quickly became functionally outdated. Saarinen envisioned 1950s aviation as a service for the elite, with passengers seated in mobile lounges to socialize, enjoy a cocktail, and ride directly to the jetway with ease. He didn't envision air travel becoming widespread. Crowds of people quickly turned his elegant idea into a bottleneck that lost its effectiveness. By the 1980s, only 20 years after its opening, it became clear that the airport needed serious modernization. However, the classic Washington bureaucracy was not long in coming. They built a huge terminal in the middle of the airfield, calling it temporary. But in Washington logic, temporary is apparently a synonym for the next 40 years, since it has been operating almost unchanged since 1985. Saarinen's idea of mobile lounges has been turned into slow shuttle buses carrying people and their carry-on luggage to the outer D gates. And if you're lucky enough to be flying out of the C section gates, you'll first have to take the underground train from the main terminal there. When you finally get to the right place, be prepared to stand, because there are chronically not enough seats for passengers on narrow and wide-body aircraft. But inside the plane, you will still have time to get enough of it. And this is all a likely explanation for my disgusting mood when I finally made it to the gate one Sunday afternoon in October, getting ready for a business trip to Denver. The conference started too early on Monday, and Sunday had to be sacrificed for it. The boarding area was crowded, and then I heard a signal from the mobile application. The flight was delayed. In the noise of the terminal, I could hardly hear the voice of the agent at the gate. Attention passengers of Flight 1769 to Denver. Our arriving plane was unable to take off due to a technical problem. But there is good news. We managed to find a replacement, and the delay will only be about 90 minutes. The plane has a slightly different configuration, but all passengers with tickets and confirmed reservations will fly. Please update your apps to see the new seat number or contact gate staff. Looking at my application, I saw that I had previously been allocated seat 16D. But as I expected, when changing the type of aircraft, the numbering of the rows may differ, and in the end, the application showed me a new place, 12E middle, the same one that any self-respecting solo business traveler tries to avoid. To put it mildly, the start of the trip did not go well. I decided to go to the toilet so that I wouldn't have to get up later, or at least not have to do it too often during the almost 4-hour flight. When I returned, the landing was announced. Having walked along the boarding bridge onto the plane, I immediately began looking for free space on the luggage racks, looking for my row. Once I had settled my suitcase, I turned around to take 12E, and then I noticed a clearly nervous woman sitting by the window. I couldn't help but notice that she was about my age, very attractive, and in good physical shape. Moreover, as soon as I mentally had time to rejoice that there would be a pretty fellow traveler next to me, there was a large man on the left in aisle seat 12D. Involuntarily, I moved to the right, finding myself in the zone of the personal space of the stranger at the window. She cast a displeased glance at me, but, catching my gaze, turned her eyes to the well-fed neighbor on the left. After a couple of seconds, a slight smile appeared on her face, and she silently whispered sorry with only her lips, curling them a little, which only emphasized the sparkle of laughter in her eyes. I carefully extended my hand to her. "Hi, I'm Kyle." "Sarah Hamilton." "It's a pleasure, Kyle." At this moment, the pilot interrupted us with an announcement. "Good afternoon," says the commander. "We apologize for the delay. As you heard, the aircraft that was supposed to operate this flight suffered a malfunction. Fortunately, we were able to find a replacement, and we will try to get you to Denver as quickly and, most importantly, as safely as possible. We know that some of you have connections there, so for now the computer shows the arrival time as 2012 local time. If anything changes, we will inform you about the arrival time, gate, and weather closer to Denver. Now make yourself comfortable and have a nice flight. In Sarah's hands, I noticed old-fashioned paper boarding passes with a top one for the IAD Den flight and below it Den SLC. It turned out that she was flying further to Salt Lake City. As soon as we both listened to the announcement, our eyes locked on the time. Her next flight began boarding at 19:30, and we would not arrive until 2012. Sarah, do you have a short connection? I decided that this could continue our conversation and perhaps help her in some way. Looks like things are going to go awry because of the delay. The pilot said we would land at 2012 and my flight was leaving at 20:05. Well, maybe all is not lost yet. We sometimes make up travel time, and if there are other passengers on this flight to Salt Lake, the flight may be delayed so that you can make it. Sarah didn't look optimistic. She continued to nervously squeeze the paper boarding pass in her hands so tightly that veins bulge on the backs of her hands, extending to her toned, tanned forearms. I caught a glimpse of the simple wedding ring on her left hand, discreetly elegant, matching her sophisticated appearance. You know, Sarah, if you're afraid of not being on time, I can look in the app to see if there are later flights. It may be better to rebook immediately to guarantee your flight today. Do you think there is another flight to Salt Lake? Sarah looked at me with hope. I checked the airline's mobile app and found the next flight was at 10:30 p.m. It's hard to say how full it was, but the seating chart had 4 unoccupied seats, and the system status showed that economy class tickets were still available. Well, I see the departure is at 22:30. Looks like there are still free places there. It may be worth rebooking in advance to avoid being stuck at the airport all night. Then I will do so. How to do this? Then the commander announced, "Flight attendants, please take your seats for takeoff." Do you have this airline's mobile app installed? Yes, they just gave me a paper coupon when they changed the type of plane. Actually, this whole situation is annoying. After takeoff and climb, the onboard Wi-Fi will be turned on. Then let's try to re-register it in flight. I'll help. About 10 minutes into the taxi, we actually got off the ground. A beep sounded to indicate we were above 10,000 feet, and the onboard Wi-Fi was working. I asked Sarah if she knew how to connect to the network. She didn't know, seemed new to air travel. I asked for her phone number. She looked at me with disbelief after all. We had just met. Come on, Sarah. How can you not trust a middle-aged man in a hot pink polo? I already felt that I was behaving overly self-confidently. Sarah was embarrassed and handed me the phone. I was just about to ask you about this pink t-shirt. It's October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I wear pink in support. My wife, Amy, has been diagnosed with breast cancer twice. I think you are undergoing preventive examinations. Amy says it saved her life twice. Not everyone is so lucky. Sarah seemed to freeze for a second. Her mouth opened, but there were no words. Finally, with difficulty, she said, Yes, I get examined regularly. And I completely agree with Amy. I realized a long time ago that this topic can be too personal for many. I wear pink not so much for awareness as to please my wife. This is one of the few things I can still do for her. I usually try not to go into details with strangers, but for some reason I felt more confident with Sarah. However, her restrained reaction once again reminded me that polite society shuns such conversations. I was able to connect Sarah's phone to Wi-Fi and log into the airline app. I showed her how to use the Reebok options icon that appeared due to the delay and booked her a flight at 22:30 SLC. Sarah was visibly relieved to see that she would now have 2 extra hours for the transfer and a guaranteed seat. Thank you, Kyle. I myself would never have thought that you could do this right on the plane. You seem to have saved me from spending the night at the airport and being late for tomorrow's courses. Glad to help. See, sometimes a man in a pink shirt is for the best. At this point, the conversation died down on its own. Because of the large neighbor on the left, I had to sit quite close to Sarah, but she was still lost in her thoughts. She either raised and lowered the window shade or flipped through the in-flight magazine, throwing it away after a couple of minutes. After some time, she turned to me with an unexpectedly serious expression on her face. "You mentioned that Amy survived breast cancer. How is she feeling now?" "As good as possible in her situation. This, of course, is not the result we hoped for, but much better than many. Our lives changed a lot, and the two of us had to get used to the new reality." I spoke the formulaic truth, avoiding details. In fact, Amy underwent treatment twice, and, judging by the doctor's prognosis, there is a risk of relapse. Still, she prides herself on being what her doctor calls a model patient. It's not about appearance, but about strict adherence to therapy. The point is to completely suppress her natural sex hormones because they can contribute to the resumption of tumor growth. To say that this did not affect our relationship is a lie. We are both trying to live with this, having no other choice. Interrupting treatment is too huge a risk. Nobody wants to choose, either save the marriage or survive. It seems that I involuntarily reflected all this on my face because I did not expect Sarah's subsequent question. "I understand. But if we speak directly, how do you deal with this? Usually no one asks me about this, especially women. And also one who is attractive to me and seems to show special attention to me." But her question sounded too sincere and deep to evade. I probably relaxed a little. "This is an incredibly difficult situation. If I were sick, I would really want Amy to support me at any cost. And I also feel that I have an obligation to support her. But to be honest, our relationship is no longer the same and, apparently, will never be the same." I wasn't sure whether it was worth sharing such a revelation with an almost unknown woman. But after my words, Sarah's gaze became even more melancholy, full of sympathy and understanding. She wanted to say something, but she just silently put her hand on my thigh just above the knee, and then turned to the porthole, closed the curtain, and closed her eyes, as if about to take a nap. I felt a strange emotional shock and also decided to close my eyes. 3 minutes later, I fell asleep. In the dream, I remembered this morning. I woke up before my wife as usual on weekends, and, knowing that I would be gone for almost a week, I decided to try to make love to her before leaving. Amy was sleeping on her back. The outline of her reconstructed breasts was clearly visible under the sheet. I began to caress them out of habit, and then moved lower, trying to excite her in the usual ways. But after turning off the hormones, Amy's body does not react to this as before. She sighed heavily with a half-closed eye and rolled her eyes. "Well, okay, let this morning be for you," Amy said, taking off her panties and making it clear that she herself would not be particularly involved. I had to use a lubricant without it. Everything happened with obvious discomfort for her. This mechanical, empty act was no longer love. There was no emotion left in it. I learned not to drag out the process until Amy completely lost interest. When I was almost finished, she squeezed my hips and said tiredly, "Come on, Kyle." I shuddered at the memory. Previously, when passion was still burning between us, she whispered something intimate. Her voice was full of desire. Now her words sounded like a request to just finish quickly. A shock tore me out of this dream. The plane hit a zone of turbulence. Sarah also woke up and looked worried. Dusk was gathering outside the windows, and the plane was noticeably throwing up and down. I, as a person accustomed to frequent flights, understood that we would quickly pass this section, but this did not reassure Sarah. Everything will pass soon. If there is no other way to avoid a thunderstorm, pilots try to get out of the shaking zone as quickly as possible. It won't harm the plane, but the main thing for us is to sit buckled up. She grabbed my right hand with her left. Her touch was like an electric shock, a warm palm, an intense gaze, and I felt excitement running through me, especially after that dream. After a few minutes, the chatter really ended, and Sarah wordlessly let go of my hand, turning her eyes back to the porthole. Soon the pilot announced that we were beginning our descent towards Denver. When we landed, I decided to take a chance. Some part of me wanted to continue communicating. "Now you have to wait a couple more hours before the flight. How about we have a glass of wine at the gate bar? I'll treat you." She seemed surprised, but admitted that she still needed to pass the time somewhere. We found a cafe near the gate for her flight. One glass of wine was quickly replaced by a second. Sarah finally relaxed. Her mood noticeably improved. I decided to ask about her husband. Listen, tell me about your... What's his name? Jeff. When we met, I was studying at college, and he was teaching there. Just like in the movie The Graduate. He is still a professor, and then I graduated, and a couple of years later, we got married. This was almost 20 years ago. So there is an age difference between you. Yes, he's almost 60, I'm 45. Never had any problems until some problems arose recently. The smile quickly disappeared from her face. Sarah, when you asked me on the plane how I was coping with Amy's difficulties, it seemed to mean something to you. As if you have a similar situation yourself. Sigh. My husband, Jeff, is also a cancer survivor. Only prostates. He chose surgery. The doctor convinced him that this would give him a chance to avoid long-term hormone therapy, and thanks to the nerve-saving technique, sexual function would be preserved. But in fact, everything turned out differently. Erectile function was almost not restored, and for the first time we encountered very serious problems in our marriage. After taking a sip of wine, she continued a little more frankly. They even had to turn to a family psychologist. Sarah tried to support Jeff and told him that she was not afraid of changes in her sex life, that they would overcome everything together. But Jeff himself is constantly irritated, worried, feeling that he has lost an important part of his life. I tried so many times to explain to him that this is not the end of the world, but he himself doesn't believe it. He says he knows me better. And now he is constantly on edge. We began to quarrel, although he wasn't like this before. I dreamed that Amy would agree to family therapy, but she believes that we don't need it, that we are not sick with our relationship, but that we need oncology specialists. But I can't find anyone who understands exactly how a couple should live when the problem is medical. We have a wonderful psychologist, Dr. Campbell. I can give his contact information if you want. And yes, I agree with you. There is nothing left but to accept the situation and move on. I decided on another bold gesture and took Sarah's phone a second time to write down my number for her. Essentially, it was an easy way to exchange contacts. I returned the phone to her. Now you have a certain Kyle Cooper on your list. You could send me the coordinates of Dr. Campbell. I would be very grateful. Sarah rummaged through her address book and was embarrassed. It turned out that she didn't have the doctor's number in her phone, only a business card and papers at home. She promised that she would send everything this weekend when she returned. I had a little doubt whether he would do it, but then it was time for her to board the flight to Salt Lake. Kyle, I'm glad that fate brought us together today. Thank you for helping with the ticket and conversation. It feels like we were meant to meet. We smiled at each other and hugged one last time in a friendly way. I looked after her as she went to land. There was a strange emptiness left. I suddenly realized that I was really sorry if we never met again. I went to pick up the rental car and then to the hotel. I got to my room at midnight and collapsed from fatigue. But for a long time I could not sleep without ceasing to think about Sarah. In the end, I indulged in the fantasy that she was not. I started rebooking my flights, missed my flight, and now I'm stuck in Denver. And we spent the night alone in my room, indulging in unbridled passion for the first time. After masturbating, I finally passed out, sleeping restlessly for the rest of the night. A week in Denver quickly relieved me of these dreams. Work distracted me from everything. I was supposed to fly out on Friday morning, but I returned on Thursday, feeling guilty about my thoughts and flirting with Sarah, and I wanted to see Amy quickly. Along the way, she texted me that her elderly mother had fallen and broken her wrist in a nursing home in New Jersey, and that she was on her way there immediately. So my early arrival home made no sense. I was in for a lonely weekend. The thought of Sarah returned again. She promised to send the doctor's contacts, but has not yet announced herself. But I didn't have time to save her number, and there was no way I could contact her first. I began to doubt that I would ever see her. I was in the mood for a long, lonely weekend in an empty house. My thoughts anxiously returned to Sarah. I hadn't heard from her and was mostly waiting for her to keep her promise and share Dr. Campbell's contact information, which in turn would give me her personal phone number. I had no other way to contact her, and I kicked myself for returning her phone to her without sending a message to myself on it. By Sunday evening, Amy was still at her mother's, and I had heard nothing from her or Sarah. I had already begun to come to terms with the idea that I would never hear. It seemed logical to find my own counselor and double down on my efforts to get Amy to go to couples therapy with me. I ended up having a little more time to think about it all since Amy didn't get home until Wednesday afternoon. When she arrived, she was distant, tired, and irritable. I'm sure she's tired of helping her mom and the long journey back. When I suggested going to bed, she expressed some tension. It was our first night together in over 10 days. Previously, we would not have doubted that in such a situation we would be close. Amy looked at me somewhat hopefully and asked if we could just sleep next to each other. I didn't want to argue, although I was more than willing to have some form of intimacy. Thursday morning, I had a plan. I decided to charm Amy, hoping that in the evening we could sincerely restore an intimate connection, and then over the weekend I would be able to convey to her how important it was to start going to a psychologist together. I didn't expect things to go differently because of Sarah's message. Hi, Kyle. Finally coming to my senses after a crazy week in Salt Lake City. I didn't forget the promise to send Dr. Campbell's contact information. They are attached. It was great meeting you. I hope things work out for you and Amy soon. All the best to both of you, Sarah. Frankly, I was never able to find a suitable consultant myself, so this news came in handy. But I was even more glad that Sarah had not forgotten about me. I didn't answer right away, I wanted to think. And, contrary to common sense, he sent a message without having time to properly weigh the consequences. Hi, Sarah, good to hear from you. Amy has not yet agreed to therapy with Dr. Campbell or anyone else. Any tips on how to persuade her? The message was an exaggeration because I hadn't really discussed it with Amy yet, but that's how it turned out. Sarah's answer struck me. HM. Too much for regular correspondence. Maybe we can meet for lunch tomorrow? I have this afternoon off to cover last week. My heart jumped at this invitation. Fortunately, I had the answer ready. I have a meeting with clients tomorrow morning at the Arlington Marquis Hotel. Can we have lunch there after? It's perfect. He's just on his way home. I'll be there by 12:15. My head was all mixed up with possible expectations. Everything looked too easy. I couldn't figure out whether it was our shared and rather strange feeling for our spouses that brought us together, or whether it was just a natural attraction to each other. In 20 years of marriage, I have never cheated on Amy, and such thoughts have never arisen. But the events of recent years have left me vulnerable. The intimacy we once had in the bedroom and beyond seemed both abandoned and hopelessly lost. Perhaps Sarah felt the same way, and I wanted to strengthen our intimacy, maybe even physical, given our shared experiences that only the two of us seemed to understand. Suddenly, I was cool with the idea of making love to Amy on Thursday night. All the previous obstacles disappeared. She rested from the road. We were not together for 11 nights. It seemed like the right time. But this time I myself decided not to do it. I think Amy was surprised, because this is not typical for me, but she herself did not take the initiative. When it became clear that I had gone to bed with the intention of sleeping, she turned off the light and quickly fell asleep. On Friday morning, I told Amy that I was going to a client meeting at the Arlington Marquis and would probably stay there until happy hour, and if I was later than usual, I would text her. We both have location tracking turned on our phones, so I decided it was better to tell the truth than to explain myself later when I saw her dissatisfaction when returning. I arrived at the hotel long before lunch and decided to rent a room there. At worst, I'll have my own space to work during the day, and at best, it'll be a show of confidence and a chance to retire after lunch. Then I went to the pharmacy next door and bought a pack of condoms. Another step forward, so as not to leave any reasons to put things off. Now, looking back, I realized that I was sadly naive. but at the time it seemed like a good idea. Sarah arrived promptly at 12:15 and looked stunning. She was wearing tight jeans with a slight ripped effect and a tight blouse formally suitable for casual Friday, but clearly not for other working days. Her hair was beautifully styled and her makeup was flawless, as if she had just come from a photo shoot. I couldn't help but think that we both understood why we were here, why I suggested meeting at the hotel, why she came looking so impressive. We ordered lunch and made normal small talk, mostly about how to get Amy to see a psychologist. I barely touched my food, but Sarah, on the contrary, looked more relaxed and talkative than when we first met. As lunch was ending, I kept the envelope with my room key card under the phone on the table. I moved the phone to the other side of the plate and moved the key card slightly so that it was closer to Sarah. I waited for her to smile, take the key, and thereby give me a silent sign. But the smile that I was waiting for immediately gave way to concern, familiar to me from our first meeting. Sarah began to shake her head and became visibly embarrassed. "Kyle, I'm sorry. I I didn't mean to. God, I didn't mean to lead to this." I quickly removed the key from the table and put it in my shirt pocket, admitting defeat. "Sarah, I guess I got carried away. I don't usually behave like this. I just felt a certain connection. You yourself understand my situation, because your experience with your husband is so similar. I really didn't want to put you in an awkward position. Understand and forgive me." Sarah took a deep breath, blushed deeply, and seemed to need a moment to collect her thoughts. "Kyle, I agree, we have common problems, big ones, and they cannot be solved by simply turning a blind eye to them. But I don't know what to do with my feelings for you. I've never cheated on Jeff, and I definitely wouldn't have come today if I thought it could go that far. I thought we could use our shared dissatisfaction to somehow improve our relationship with our spouses. I'm not as naive as it probably sounds, but I understand that we both share too much, and everything is very difficult. I think it's time for me to go." I stood up and opened my arms for a hug, not wanting it to end this way. At the same time, I understood that, most likely, this would be our last meeting in this format. Sarah took a step towards me and accepted the hug, which lasted a little longer than usual. Her face buried itself in my shoulder. I heard her sob quietly. When she pulled away, I noticed a tear quickly roll down her cheek, and she quickly headed towards the exit. I was confused. First of all, because he made a move and missed, but also because I felt guilty. I shouldn't look for something on the side while I have a wife. Even though our relationship with Amy is far from what it was before, I must at least try to save it before I ruin everything completely. I decided to do the smart thing and returned alone to the room that I had already paid for to work there for the rest of the day. I left the hotel shortly after 5, expecting to see Amy and get ready for a serious conversation to try to bring some warmth back into the relationship. I didn't expect to find her in tears right at the kitchen table. "Who is she?" I froze in my tracks, completely unprepared for such a question. Who is she, and how long has all this been going on? Amy took her phone and angrily slid it across the table in my direction. On the screen was a photo of my long goodbye hug with Sarah at the marquee. I was feverishly thinking about how to explain everything, confess everything at once, lie. In the end, I chose something in between. "How did you get this photo, Amy?" "I have a photograph of you hugging an unfamiliar woman, and you ask who took this. Is that all you can say? If you accuse me of treason, then yes, it is important for me to understand where you got it from. What's wrong with you, Amy? What's wrong with me? What about you? We haven't seen each other for almost 2 weeks. Yesterday, you simply ignored me, and today you say that you are going to work at a hotel, and you are surprised that I began to suspect. I didn't think I had anything to hide. And how should I react to this, Kyle? This is just my friend Amy. We met at lunch. There's no need to react like that." "How should I react, Kyle? Her name is Sarah Hamilton. We met 2 weeks ago on a plane on the way to Denver. During the conversation, she said that she and her husband were going to a psychotherapist because he had prostate cancer and it was affecting their relationship. We agreed that she would share contact information when she returned to Washington, and so we decided to meet for lunch. There was nothing else there. Kyle, get out. Get out of our house. Amy, I want us to go to a psychologist. We need help. If you like the Marquis so much, go back there. Amy, this is my home too. I'm not leaving. I obediently lay under you all these years. She underwent surgery to remove her breast, several rounds of chemotherapy. I took drugs that killed my hormones, and through it all I tried never not to deny you intimacy, no matter how painful it may be, no matter how dry it is, no matter how much I wanted to be anywhere but where a man was squeezing me between his thighs. I did all this to remain a devoted wife and to prevent my husband from looking for solace elsewhere, and it's all in vain. Damn you, Kyle. Amy, don't do this. If you don't leave now, I will. I can't be in the same room with you anymore. I decided to return to Marquis after all. I had a room until Saturday. I thought that one night of cooling would help and we could talk calmly. Maybe it's even for the better. Suddenly, this quarrel will become a reason to discuss everything honestly and go together to a psychologist. But my hopes were not justified. On Saturday and Sunday, Amy did not answer any calls or messages. I extended the number until Monday, but it became too expensive, and I had to either return home or look for something more affordable. On Monday, she wrote, "I hope you are looking for another place to live." I immediately called and texted her, but to no avail. Then I checked into a cheap hotel on the outskirts. I was determined that I would not let our marriage end without a fight, but I also knew it was time to consult a lawyer if I had to defend myself. Looks like Amy is one step ahead again. 2 days later, I received a short message. "We need your address to serve the summons officially." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to slow down the process and try to get it under control. Now, I definitely needed a lawyer. I found one, Jerry Sivers, and he, frankly, was not optimistic. Amy had photographs that suggested I was a traitor, even if nothing actually happened. She looked clearly angry. According to Jerry, he had seen similar cases before when a marriage broke up after a serious illness of one of the spouses, and it was always very difficult. Fortunately, we did not have children, but he did not think that this would greatly change the possible division of property or alimony. He also did not offer much hope regarding reconciliation. My position that there really was nothing didn't change the situation much. It turned out that I was exposed as a traitor, even if I didn't have time to lift a finger. Either I was incredibly unlucky, or I failed everything myself, or I'm just an idiot. I gave Amy Jerry's contact information and asked her to deliver the documents to him in the office. I hoped that such an offensive would force her to at least come to a conversation with me. But the next day, I already received a subpoena. I still continued to write to her, asking for a meeting. I wanted to explain myself and remind her that we had been together for 20 years. I insisted that there was nothing between me and Sarah, but Amy didn't answer. I had to look for an apartment. I needed somewhere to live. I started to get depressed. I wasn't looking for an affair. I loved being married, but I found myself vulnerable, not realizing how stuck Amy and I were. I underestimated how much physical intimacy kept our feelings afloat, and as it turned out, it worked in the opposite direction, especially after Amy's diagnosis and treatment. Why didn't anyone warn me about this earlier? Sitting on the floor of my new empty apartment, unfurnished, in the dark, where the only source of light was the phone charging, I received the first message from Sarah in 2 weeks since the ill-fated dinner. "Hi, Kyle. I wanted to know how you were, or just say that I was thinking about you all this time and felt terrible that I could mislead you. Maybe I should ask you for forgiveness and understanding. Anyway, I hope things are working out for you and Amy, and that you're working with Dr. Campbell or someone like him." I answered briefly. "Amy kicked me out of the house and is leaving me. She's sure I'm cheating on her." A few minutes of silence, and suddenly a call. Sarah on the other end. "Kyle, what happened?" One day, Amy had a picture of the two of us hugging at the Marquis. I confessed everything and tried to explain how and under what circumstances we met. That is, with the best intentions. It didn't change anything. But there was nothing. God, this is so unfair. Maybe I should call her. Do you really think this will change anything? I don't know until I try. I need to consult a lawyer. He believes that my fate has already been decided. Kyle, I'm so sorry. I feel guilty. I never thought that everything could turn out like this. The blame is entirely mine, Sarah. Don't worry about it. Come back and be there for Jeff. He deserves and appreciates your love. I would definitely appreciate it. I ended the call and burst into tears sitting on the floor. I haven't washed or shaved for 3 days, and I barely ate. I had to pull myself together. This morning I called Jerry and asked if I could use Sarah in court to prove my innocence and save my marriage, even if it would weaken my position in the divorce. No way, Kyle. Don't let your emotions cloud your brain. You play checkers and your wife plays chess, he said irritably. Jerry, I'm not trying to be tricky. I want to save my marriage. I'm not looking for any tricks or a shortcut back home. I just want to go back. Is it true? Imagine that you yourself bring your mistress, who is suspected of your infidelity, in order to explain things to your wife, who has filed for divorce. The first thing her lawyer will do is demand a formal affidavit from Sarah. And do you know what the first question will be? Well, yes. Did you and Kyle have a sexual relationship? No. Next question. Damn it, Kyle, is this why you hired a lawyer? No, the first question will be, did Kyle directly suggest that you have sex or have an affair? Answer, yes, and that's all. Explain how this will help. Jerry, just slow down. If not Sarah, then what else should I do? Kyle, you can't make this process go your way. My advice is to start preparing to accept reality. Marriages, especially when there are serious health problems in midlife, often simply end. Sorry for saying it so bluntly. Maybe Amy really wants to settle everything as quickly as possible so that you can be freed from this burden and move on your own. I have seen dozens of similar cases and can roughly guess how it all ends. It's better for you to accept this than to waste your nerves and money by delaying the process. It was a tough conversation, but I began to realize that he might be right. Maybe it really is better to let go and move on. What was I actually holding on to? We are not particularly overgrown with complex property. Amy, after all the illnesses she experienced, became a different person, unfortunately, not for the better. Starting over again in the middle of life is a scary idea, but I was already scared to return home. I spent another lonely weekend on the floor in an empty apartment. I tried to occupy myself with anything. Sports, healthy food, I lose noticeable weight, although I was already quite slim. I even downloaded a dating app to see if there were any new worlds out there that I hadn't seen yet. On Sunday afternoon, Sarah unexpectedly texted me again. Can we talk? I didn't respond by text and called back straight away. There was a dial tone, then an answering machine. I hung up. A couple of minutes later, she dialed it herself. Sarah Hamilton. Hey, if you want to talk to Amy, she's not here. In fact, she left me and is still getting a divorce. How are you doing? Sarah was silent for several long seconds, and when she spoke, her voice sounded excited. Kyle, I didn't mean to ask you to call Amy. I called to find out how you were holding up. Well, let's think about it. I'm sitting in an empty, unfurnished apartment. My lawyer thinks I'm hopeless, and I recently met an attractive but unavailable woman on a plane and tried unsuccessfully to start a forbidden affair with her. In general, a standard Sunday in the suburbs of Washington. How are you? It's clear that things are even worse for you than I thought. It looks like I wasn't mistaken when I started worrying about you. It's nice to know that at least someone else cares about me after everything that happened. So how's Jeff? We agreed that you would focus on your husband. Another pause, longer. Then Sarah answered seriously and quietly. That's probably the reason I called. I told Jeff everything. How we met on the plane, how we met at lunch, how our intentions were not entirely innocent, and how Amy threw you out because of this story, and I tormented myself with guilt. I decided it was better to be honest before it got worse. I saw what was going on with you, and I realized that the same thing could happen to Jeff and me if we weren't honest. But what happened wasn't exactly what I expected, and I hoped you would be understanding about it. Sarah, I hope you won't say that Jeff put you out on the street too. No, Kyle, he didn't ask me to leave and doesn't intend to. He asked something else, that I formally introduce you to each other. Do you really think Amy could go a whole year or longer without experiencing a single pleasure? I'm sitting in Dr. Campbell's cold, windowless office. Since Amy didn't go, I decided to go alone. Yes, Sarah and I communicate less for now, but she praised this specialist so much that I thought, even if things don't work out with Amy, I need help myself. They say he helped her and Jeff a lot, and here I sit, and the doctor asks, do you think your wife really hasn't experienced pleasure all this year or even longer? I don't know, you should ask her yourself. Maybe sometimes she was close, or she had weak, superficial sensations. But overall, I'm pretty sure that after starting hormone-blocking medications, our intimate relationships became mostly one-sided. At least, I attributed everything to this. It's not hard to imagine why she lost interest in sex, especially if it also caused her pain, right? You, on the other hand, continued to act as if nothing had changed. Well, no, of course, everything has changed. She complained to the doctor. I was even present. He was mostly not very sympathetic and insisted that things would get back to normal in time as she adapted to the treatment and made a full recovery from all the surgeries. He looked me in the eyes and suggested that I just continue in the same spirit, assuring me that everything would work out. But nothing has really improved, and following his advice, I never tried to change anything. What a pity. I wish I had met you earlier. I would have given completely different recommendations. Remember that the oncologist's job is to save the patient's life. Sometimes a more realistic description of the possible consequences of therapy can simply frighten a person and discourage him from following the prescribed treatment. Having said that, I want you to focus on what you actually did, intentionally or not, that could have harmed your marriage, rather than on the consequences of your actions, or, in some cases, inactions. What did I do, or didn't do? I don't understand. Kyle, you came here believing that your emotional infidelity was the reason Amy filed for divorce, and you blame yourself for it. But your attempt at an affair was only a symptom, not the cause, of your marital problems. So we blame Amy and her cancer treatment for the destruction of our once happy marriage. Unfortunately, no. Well, to some extent, of course, you both bear responsibility, although Amy is perhaps more innocent in this after all. She did not ask to be diagnosed with a fatal disease. This led to an accumulation of silent irritation, which manifested itself most acutely in your sex life. Kyle, if we had met earlier, I could have helped you with this. Amy became essentially a different person after the illness and its treatment. She also needed another husband, one who could accept that his wife had now changed dramatically. Yes, and definitely not for the better. Stop it, Kyle. Do you think she liked it herself? How do you think she felt trying to be intimate if sex used to bring her pleasure, but now only pain? Do you think she wasn't at least a little jealous that she didn't experience pleasure for a whole year, while you could literally come at will? You were already sleeping on a bed soaked in gasoline, and a photo of you and another woman became a match that set everything on fire and turned your home filled with love into ashes. If I had met you 6 months earlier, could we have saved our marriage? Perhaps, maybe not. In such situations, a whole range of outcomes are possible, but I can boil them down to four main ones. At my best, I work with couples to help them completely rethink their approach to sexual intimacy. Essentially, you have to throw out all the ideas you have about your partner and start over as if it were a new relationship, because in a way it is. It seems impossible when you've been together for over 20 years. I didn't say it was easy or even probable, but it's possible. There are many ways to get a woman interested in sex again, but most couples never explore them. Dirty talk, role play, toys in the bedroom. Fantasies, fetishes, sometimes even rough sex with bondage. For many couples, there is a hidden, unknown world that she is not even aware of, especially if you tried to ask her directly. Almost everyone has these secret desires, even if on a subconscious level, and even in postmenopausal women or taking hormone-suppressing medications. You probably never did this because you didn't have to. In the old days, her natural libido was strong enough to support a healthy relationship. When it disappeared from Amy, you replaced it with, well, nothing. I usually spend a dozen or more coaching sessions with interested and open couples, teaching them to explore these possibilities, and half the time it is successful. We've never even tried any of this. This means there are 3 more options left. I'm listening. The next 2 most common scenarios involve some degree of celibacy, either for both spouses or only for the one who has problems with his sex life. Often older couples naturally arrive at this outcome. They accept their fate, and these changes manifest as a cessation of physical sexual activity. Such couples try to reorient their marriage towards a friendly partnership. For young couples, this option is usually unacceptable. In such cases, a revision of the marriage contract usually occurs. Often a marriage is maintained for the sake of children or some other important reason. But in fact, one of the spouses agrees to turn a blind eye to the fact that his partner seeks satisfaction of his physical and emotional sexual needs outside the traditional marriage. Do you mean an open marriage? Does this even work? In fact, more often than you might think, when there are no other alternatives but divorce. This concept is called ethical non-monogamy. Essentially, a spouse without sexual restrictions finds a partner outside of marriage with the full knowledge and consent of his primary partner. However, such open relationships most often turn out to be a temporary solution. Over time, couples usually return to a virtually celibate life with occasional deviations that are forgiven due to circumstances. Or, in some cases, the one who enters into such relationships becomes completely infatuated with his new partner and naturally leads to divorce. This most often happens when children leave the parental home, or when events get out of control, a lover gives an ultimatum, an unplanned pregnancy occurs, and so on. And that brings us to the 4th most common scenario. And this means that Amy just kicked me out of the house. Well, more or less. But yes, it is not at all uncommon for couples to immediately declare irreconcilable differences and get divorced. In such cases, this is usually a merciful solution for both parties. In Amy's example, she likely sees herself as a liberator freeing herself from the obligation of marital duty to a husband who can no longer give her physical pleasure, while simultaneously giving you an open opportunity to build a healthy, more mutually satisfying sexual relationship with a new partner. So you're saying that I should officially accept Amy's intention to divorce me and move on. I was foolish to hope that there was any chance of reconciliation between us. I don't see a chance for reconciliation. It's a pity that I didn't meet you earlier. From the way you described Amy, it seems to me that you would have a chance to rebuild your intimate life. Or at least it would be worth trying before either looking for other options or giving up completely. But now it seems it's too late. Kyle, I'm sorry. Last question, Dr. Campbell, if I may. In the case where a couple decides to explore the concept of ethical non-monogamy, are there any rules or frameworks that will help it be successful in the long run? I asked this question out of selfish motives, not knowing whether Dr. Campbell realized that there was a connection between Sarah's recommendation, the fact that she was the woman in the photo of Amy who caught me in the alleged affair, and her own status as a patient with a problematic partner. Basically, there are 2 rules here. One is obvious and, as a rule, does not cause controversy, but the second is much more complex and sometimes even becomes a stumbling block for couples. Although, to me, it is completely logical. First, spouses must trust each other completely and maintain excellent communication in all aspects. No secrets or half-truths. They need to know where their partner is, who he is with, and so on. Please note that the details of what exactly the partners do can usually be veiled, yet in such conditions, spouses must maintain a certain degree of personal space. After all, the imagination can sometimes run wild, but in healthy relationships, people rarely need the juicy details of their partner's extramarital affairs. However, they must know exactly when the spouse left, when he will return, and where he is approximately. It wasn't obvious to me, so maybe I learned something new. What's the catch? Simply put, what is allowed to one spouse without judgment or consequences, the same should be allowed to the other. And this can manifest itself in different ways. For example, in your case, this would mean being completely transparent with Amy about your extramarital affairs. In return, she will receive an equal right to an evening with her friends, or to immerse herself in some activity for herself if she so chooses, and most likely she will. In a strict sense, this also means that Amy remains free to openly explore her own extramarital affairs without judgment or inhibition from you if she ever decides to do so. The same rules should apply to both. And this is the very nuance that people usually do not expect, but it is completely consistent with the very mechanisms that make fantasies and fetishes so powerful in restoring lost intimacy. In new relationships and experiences, especially for women, there is a certain unnatural force that can outweigh everything else. And oh yeah, how husbands hate to hear that. But it's true. My head was spinning as I left Dr. Campbell's office. It was a lot of information, but it definitely helped me finally accept that my marriage in both absolute and relative terms, as I had known it before, was over. There was no way back to our previous relationship, and at this point, there was no obvious reason to consider any alternatives other than divorce. I was ready to move on. So what now? Delay the divorce process or settle everything faster, and then what? I hadn't been on a real date in over 20 years, and my clumsy attempt at romance with Sarah certainly didn't inspire confidence in my skills. All this was running through my head as I contemplated Sarah's invitation to dinner with Jeff this Saturday. From my point of view, I was on my way to becoming a completely free person. I no longer had the same marital affection that Sarah had. Maybe I should be grateful for that. I didn't know what to expect from this dinner, but I hoped that it would bring closure to the whole story and, if necessary, help reconcile Sarah and Jeff. I definitely didn't want her to go through what I went through with Amy. Dinner on Saturday arrived in a much friendlier atmosphere than I could have imagined. I arrived at the restaurant to find Jeff and Sarah already seated at a round table set for three. It was the level of attention to detail that I appreciate in women, and the format also allowed us to have a conversation as equals without awkwardness. Jeff seemed like a typical academic: jeans, jacket, thick glasses, and slightly disheveled hair. Despite his age and health problems, he was in good shape for his 60 years. He stood up without hesitation and shook my hand vigorously upon meeting me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a demonstrative gesture, but at the same time I was overcome with déjà vu. I remembered the first dinner with Amy's parents, when they assessed me as the future husband of their daughter. It was something similar here, only this time it was the honor of his wife, not his daughter, that was at stake. Sarah had already ordered a bottle of her favorite red wine, and she and Jeff thoroughly enjoyed their first glasses. I poured myself some too, hoping it would help me relax and make the awkward conversation, well, at least a little less awkward. I decided that I shouldn't lag behind Jeff in showing confidence and took the lead in the conversation. We discussed my career, extensive travel experience, and ultimately my adjustment to single adult life. The conversation flowed easily and naturally until we finished the wine. The waiter had not appeared for about 30 minutes, and the restaurant was crowded. Jeff waved off the dinner order a couple of times. Suddenly, his gaze became more serious, and he turned to Sarah. "Sarah, honey, why don't you go to the bar and see if you can bring us another bottle of wine? Or maybe order yourself a cocktail. I'd like to talk to our friend Kyle alone for a few minutes." Sarah nodded silently and slowly walked through the crowd towards the bar. I felt a little uneasy. What if someone tried to pick her up there? I didn't really like the idea of being alone with Jeff anyway. "Kyle, you seem like a really nice guy to me. I'm so sorry to hear that your relationship with Amy is over. You know, I never considered myself a person capable of marriage until I met Sarah. For 15 years, I chased skirts all over the university. Hell, when I first started working here, Sarah was just a girl. I never imagined that we would ever have the opportunity to build an adult life together, and now I can't imagine a day without her. If she decided to leave me, I would be lost. I took a deep sip of the remaining wine and nodded. I had nothing to say, so I decided to remain silent and see if Jeff would continue talking. Kyle, I asked Sarah to invite you to dinner tonight so I could share something extremely personal with you. I need you to understand why I feel the need to do this. Essentially, you embody two of my deepest personal fears, and that's why I have the utmost respect for you. And I hope that over time I can trust you, including with my deepest vulnerabilities. I think that one day we could trust each other with the most valuable thing I have. Jeff, of course, we are talking now about your wife, Sarah. I hope you understand that I accepted the invitation this evening with the most honest intentions. I'm sure Sarah told you this ahead of time. Jeff's eyes narrowed, and he looked around, as if checking to see if there was anyone nearby who could overhear our conversation. Look, Kyle, if we're really going to trust each other, we both need to cut through all this pretentiousness and bullshit about the reasons why we're here. I want you to understand that when I realized what was happening to me after the operation, I realized that the life I knew before was over. It was impossible to return completely to the previous state. My two greatest fears are losing physical intimacy with the greatest love of my life and the inevitability that one day she will leave for another man, younger, stronger, more capable. And do you know what happened when I finally stopped feeling sorry for myself and accepted this fact? I finished my wine in silence, never taking my eyes off Jeff. I accepted that she deserved better. I had 15 years of college-aged lovers in the prime of life, and Sarah had never experienced that. You know, she claims that I'm the only man in her life. Even now, I don't fully believe her. It's hard to imagine that she learned everything she is capable of only from me. You have less to worry about than you think, Jeff. In my experience, Sarah is quite happy with you remaining her only partner. I think you have a worthy and completely devoted wife. Ask me how I know this, although I didn't say it out loud. Jeff covered his mouth with his hand, hiding his expression. Fuck you, Kyle. You don't know what it's like to depend on a mechanical device to maintain the illusion of arousal, or watch your loving wife fake pleasure by moving over and over again on a completely lifeless body. But I know what it's like when your partner is unable to engage in or enjoy sex. Yeah, and I think you also know what it's like when that same partner ends up kicking you out the door. And suddenly I understood what Jeff was getting at. We stared into each other's eyes, experiencing a strange, silent understanding of what we had been through. Different situations, but in some ways they were similar. Our silence was broken by a slightly tipsy Sarah who returned to the table. I convinced the bartender to give us another bottle of red. Hope the waiter comes back soon. We need to order dinner. He. Sarah clearly indulged herself as she poured the wine into glasses, and the waiter returned just in time to take the order. The conversation turned to lighter topics: Jeff's work at the university and a recent holiday in the Caribbean, where Sarah again proved her naivety in travel, making everyone laugh. Only after the second bottle of wine had been drained and the plates cleared from the table did Sarah excuse herself to the ladies' room, leaving Jeff and I alone again in the now noticeably empty restaurant. Kyle, what happens next doesn't depend on me. If Sarah decides to start a relationship with you, it won't happen behind my back. I will not stop her from being a free adult woman. However, I ask one thing from you: respect our situation and ultimately, our marriage. Sarah is the most important thing I have, so important that I am willing to offer her what I previously thought was impossible, as compensation for what I can no longer give her. You already know what it's like to lose your partner completely. I have to trust that this experience will guide your actions in the right direction. Jeff, I'm not going to threaten your marriage. If anything happens after tonight, it will be Sarah who initiates it, not me. Kyle. Jeff leaned forward and looked around again. I think you are a smart person. You have every right to take advantage of the situation, because if I were in your place, knowing what I know now, and you may not yet, rest assured, I would not miss this chance. I'm just asking you like a man. Don't use me. Did we understand each other? Sarah's return interrupted the conversation. Jeff rose from the table with difficulty, making it clear that the evening had come to an end. Sarah, did you and Jeff come by car? No, we used a taxi service, and I was just about to call a car for us. I stood up and shook Jeff's hand firmly, looking into his eyes. I think I understand you, Jeff. Taking a taxi was indeed the best option given the situation. Sarah again demonstrated amazing insight in managing difficult circumstances. I again tempted fate by deciding to get behind the wheel. Luckily, I wasn't stopped. I reached my dark apartment and collapsed onto the mattress lying directly on the floor. There's probably a reason why newly single guys can't afford a proper bed, I thought before instantly zoning out. I stayed up late Sunday wondering if I'd ever hear from Sarah again. There was no doubt that Jeff had accepted that he couldn't keep her forever, and maybe he did love her enough to let her go if that was the only way to keep her around. But everything I saw told me Sarah is not yet ready for such a step. On Monday morning, the phone was ringing off the hook. It was my lawyer, Jerry Sivers. Kyle, I received a letter from Amy's lawyer today. It contained a selection of photographs. Looks like you recently had dinner with Sarah Hamilton and some unknown man. Oh, Jerry, this unknown man is her husband, Jeffrey Hamilton. Can't we just have dinner in a public place now? Do I need to coordinate all my exits with my almost ex-wife? Amy is putting pressure on you to agree. The sooner you sign the papers, the sooner the waiting period will begin, and the sooner this will all be over. In the meantime, you're still technically married, and it's perfectly legal for Amy and her team of private investigators, or whoever is keeping an eye on you, to take these pictures to build a story to support a possible future cheating suit. I'm tired of fighting the divorce, Jerry. Let everything be done. Let this end soon. Well, Kyle, speed does mean freedom in this case, but at a price. Amy has already filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences, but now she has some evidence to prove adultery. My advice is to choose your public appearances carefully in the coming months until we get the agreement approved in court. In particular, don't go out in public with Sarah Hamilton, and be aware that even some private spaces, especially your apartment, may be under surveillance. I cannot be held responsible for the consequences if additional evidence emerges to support filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. At best, this will delay the process and cost you a much larger amount, and at worst, you will receive significantly worse terms in the agreement than are currently offered. I was a little shocked that Amy was somehow keeping me under control again. I probably already felt that someone was watching me, but now it was confirmed. On Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. We hadn't spoken since dinner on Saturday night. Kyle, I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm still recovering from the hangover from that dinner. I wanted to invite you to lunch again. This time to a restaurant, not a hotel. And if anything happens, after lunch I immediately return to work, so that it is clear that I don't mean anything like that. Sarah, I'm being followed by a private detective hired by Amy. My lawyer has a whole folder of photos from our dinner on Saturday with Jeff. What? This bitch. She's just a petty vindictive bitch. She herself refused you. It doesn't matter. Jerry says I can't see you until the court approves my divorce. So I can't date you because of your almost ex-wife? Brilliant. Sarah, I don't make up these rules, but I admit I'm curious to hear your take on our dinner. So what did you discuss with Jeff after? That's why I suggested meeting. I can't talk about it here. Now, let's discuss this tomorrow evening, maybe even via video call. I agreed to a video call with Sarah the next evening. I still didn't understand why I needed this. My personal attraction to a married woman was preventing me from finding freedom from my doomed marriage and moving forward. Every time I met with Sarah, it seemed like I was trying to put an end to it, but in reality, I was just diving deeper into it. Damn it. Sarah seemed more reserved during our call. I decided to get straight to the point, challenging her about her nervousness reminiscent of our first meeting. It's awkward, Kyle. It's one thing to meet alone for lunch, but quite another to tell my husband that I'm going into the other room for a private conversation with my boyfriend. So I'm your boyfriend now. We didn't seem to discuss this on Saturday. I didn't put it that way. I told him that I was talking to you, and he responded by calling you my boyfriend. Sorry. This is all very new to me. I'm still sorting out my feelings. Words about the guy don't count, but Jeff liked you. Even in small things, your gallantry, how you defended my honor, how you made sure that we got home safely. You made an impression. It's not like I didn't warm up to him beforehand. Jeff asked me to respect your marriage, but at the same time he made it clear that any relationship is your choice, he will not interfere, and everything will happen transparently. We haven't discussed what that means in practice. I told Jeff I was ready to try. Yes, selfishly, I want to try this for myself, but also for his sake. He is convinced that sooner or later I will leave for another man, although I cannot imagine my life without him. But at the same time, I have to admit, there is a huge void in my life that needs to be filled with something, and I don't understand why the first time I had the chance I didn't lie with you. I've replayed this moment in my head 100 times and still can't explain why I stopped. Jeff has made it clear that if everything is done openly, and I always come back to him as the loving wife he knew me to be, then he is fully supportive of that. Well, that means there are already 3 of us. Again, Amy is left out. How soon will your divorce be finalized? I don't know. Jerry says it's a matter of months, not weeks. We are speeding up the process. We don't have children if no one challenges. I think I'm ready to wait, although I have no choice. Who said we need to wait, Sarah? I don't understand. Shouldn't we avoid meeting each other until your divorce is finalized? Yes, but no one is monitoring our video communication. Sarah blushed and bit her lip in an obvious hint. I somehow didn't think about it. The question is, what will Jeff think when you tell him that you're going into another room again for a private chat with your new boyfriend? I left the question hanging in the air as I ended the call. This whole situation was saturated with irony. This whole permitted affair began with the fact that her husband was physically unable to satisfy her. And now, thanks to my almost ex-wife, we were forced to abstain from physical contact. I didn't understand how Sarah was winning in this situation. I decided to take action. I had her address and sent her a box of sex toys. In response, a frank message came, "You guessed right with my favorites," and chose a few new ones that I haven't tried yet. Obviously, she and Jeff had already experimented, but now she had toys that she could only associate with me. We set up our first virtual meeting for Saturday evening. I confess that I had no experience to fall back on. I grew up in an era before the internet, smartphones, dating apps, and the like. I also realized that Sarah was a few months older than me, so it had to be true for her too. Saturday evening started predictably a little subdued. Sarah was quite reserved, which was natural given that her husband was somewhere in the house nearby. We spent a couple of hours just talking, gradually moving on to more taboo topics, until I openly challenged her to get her toys out. In the end, she decided to take a bold step in front of the camera, while remaining mostly clothed and focusing attention on her face. This turned me on so much that I began to act more confidently, showing my desire without further ado. Not knowing where this would all lead, I realized that everything turned out to be more competitive than romantic. It was obvious that this was completely new territory for both of us, and I wasn't sure if this would lead us to any real progress in our relationship. Correspondence over the course of a week showed that perhaps I was further along than I thought. So, how was your evening with Jeff after our meeting ended? Not as awkward as I expected. An hour later, we went to bed, only a little later than usual. Did he arrange an interrogation or left everything as it was? He was quieter than usual. We fell asleep together, as always. I didn't notice anything unusual until Sunday morning. Tell me more. We usually lie in bed in the morning and then go to brunch. But this morning Jeff got up early and said he wasn't hungry. To my surprise, he took one of my toys and, took the initiative himself. I've never seen him like this before. Wow. Continue. I don't know. He used to resist the idea of using toys together, as if it was a sign of weakness. But at that moment, he took matters into his own hands and combined with my inspiration from Saturday night. Let's just say it became a memorable morning for both of us. So you told him about our meeting, about the details? No, of course not. We initially agreed that these conversations would remain taboo for both of us. Moreover, he was not even at home all this time. He went to the bar to drink a couple of glasses of beer. Then how did he guess? Well, he saw the toys. I guess I just put two and two together. The important thing is that he was even happy about it. Perhaps he was glad that I was so pleased. Don't know. Maybe it's a competitive element, like he suddenly realized that he needs to catch up to your level. I definitely didn't expect this, but okay. It's funny, but it turns out that our conditions are suddenly equal, considering that I also can't touch you. But in your case, it's just a temporary problem. I liked her seductiveness and decided to take it even further. So you were able to thank Jeff properly in the end. After a short pause, Sarah replied that these details should remain between her and her husband. It was interesting to see which boundaries we were willing to cross and which we left unchanged. But Saturday evenings have become a familiar ritual for us. Over time, we got to the point where Sarah was willing to be completely naked in front of the camera, even do a little sexy dance. It had always been erotic, but seeing her completely naked for the first time, knowing in advance what words and hints turned her on the most, it was something special. Even though our relationship was moving in unexpected directions, it seemed like Jeff was not just accepting of what was happening, but was even somehow thriving in it. Sarah didn't go into detail, but she said he was much less irritable in everyday life and more attentive in bed, especially before and after our virtual dates. We fell into a strange but steady routine, and I began to think, is this all? Maybe Jeff valued the feeling of equality in the competition for Sarah's attention, and that was what allowed him to accept the situation. And most importantly, is Sarah ready to move from virtual intimacy to physical intimacy? I began to fear that I was driving myself into a dead end. Not wanting to leave things to chance, I asked Sarah how she would feel about me calling Jeff one-on-one. I wanted to clarify where we really stood, whether we had already gone beyond the limits he considered acceptable, and whether he was going to intervene to stop me or Sarah from taking the next step. My divorce was going to be finalized in a few weeks, and I didn't want to invest myself in a relationship if it was already at its peak. Sarah was clearly not happy with this idea. She reminded me that Jeff had made it clear that she could decide what she could and couldn't do. They had discussed boundaries in advance, and he didn't have to have anything to do with me. But I persisted, reminding her that Jeff and I had agreed upon our first and only meeting to respect each other, and an open line of communication was one sign of that respect. She didn't agree with me, but she still promised to discuss it with Jeff and leave the decision up to him. A couple of days later, I received a message from an unfamiliar number asking me to meet in the evening at a local pub. When I walked in, Jeff was already sitting in the far corner of the bar. I already ordered you a beer. Sorry, but I don't drink wine unless I'm with Sarah. Thank you. How are things at the university? It will be quieter soon. The spring midterm exams are almost over. Jeff, I just wanted to make sure you and Sarah were okay, and that everything is fine with you and me too. My divorce was about to become final, and I didn't want it to take us by surprise when I finally stepped out of Amy's shadow. Sarah and I, it has never been better. Glad to hear that. Jeff, I'm planning a vacation as soon as everything is completed with Amy. Just wanted to make sure it wouldn't be out of line if I invited Sarah to come with me. Are you asking for my permission? What the hell, Kyle? I thought we agreed that Sarah would decide this. Or do you expect me to pay for it? I just didn't want to take anything for granted, Jeff. For the record, Sarah and I haven't been together in public since we met you a few months ago. It's easy to imagine that traveling together suddenly might make you feel uncomfortable. I'm just trying to be respectful, man. Thank you. Maybe. Do what she wants, dud. Haha. Jeff, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being dumb, but I'm really trying to show you respect. If this is bothering you, now is your chance to say so. He downed half a pint of beer in one gulp, put the glass on the counter, and, without looking at me, raised his hand, ordering another. Look, Kyle, I understand. How you spend your time with Sarah is between you. I admit, I'm not pretending to be innocent. In recent weeks, things have really gotten better for her and me, perhaps even better than they were a couple of years before everything went wrong. This only reinforces my belief that she needs this, she deserves this, and if you keep your promise to bring her back to me, my marriage will remain intact. That's probably the best outcome I can hope for. And the fact that lately we have become a little happier together is just a pleasant bonus. But even for a second, I didn't believe that everything wasn't going this way. So we're even. Yeah, have fun. Send me a bunch of photos. The beach, for example. You understand, I'm teasing. Now get out of here, dude. Well, I got an answer from Jeff. Hell, it was awkward, probably even more awkward for him than for me. I called Sarah to apologize. She was right again. Maybe we really should have discussed this with just the two of us. I didn't mention the vacation because she was clearly in a hurry to end the conversation. Only a few days later did she make it clear how irritated she was by his lousy mood, with which he returned home and remained for several days, apparently blaming me. I began to question my choice again, but at the same time I felt a sense of anticipation for where this might finally be leading. Another month has passed and little has changed. We continued our Saturday evenings, although, to be honest, I was running out of ideas on how to make them interesting and exciting. Luckily, I didn't have to worry about it because I finally got the call I'd been waiting for from Jerry. Congratulations, Kyle. Yesterday, your divorce was officially filed in Fairfax Court. You are free. Don't miss the chance to start your life again. It took me about a week to get ready. But here I was again on the plane, next to Sarah, just like the day we met. Only this time we were taxiing onto runway 27 at San Francisco Airport, 4,000 kilometers of open ocean ahead to Maui. Sarah reluctantly agreed to my idea of a holiday together. This was a huge step in our relationship and an even bigger challenge for her and Jeff. Despite the late timing, I still had doubts about how things would go. Will this be the moment when we rip off the Band-Aid and move on? Or will she retreat at the last moment as she did in Markwise? Or would I really become, perhaps, just the second man she's been intimate with? I arrived to meet Sarah full of anticipation. We would finally be together as a couple, physically and not virtually. Due to a late booking during the busy season, we were unable to sit next to each other on the first leg of a transcontinental flight from the East Coast. I knew about this in advance and was upset, but in the end it turned out to be even better. She met a couple of acquaintances in the waiting area and, fortunately, thought to say that she was flying to San Francisco on business. It would be awkward to explain that she's actually heading to Maui alone or that her recently divorced boyfriend is standing in line right in front of her. We didn't meet anyone we knew on the flight to Maui. As the Boeing 757 took off powerfully from the runway, I extended my hand and Sarah took it in hers. Apart from a short toilet break, she did not let her go until boarding. When we landed, it was like we were in another world. We walked holding hands, smiling at each other like lovers. From the outside, we looked like newlyweds on their honeymoon. Even the concierge at the hotel reception, checking our reservation, confidently addressed Sarah, Mrs. Cooper. I was pleased when she played along without hesitation, as if she had heard it thousands of times. It was a long day, and we were only able to take a short nap on the plane. Despite all the tension that had been building between us for the past 8 months, I didn't want to rush things and didn't know what to expect next. The main thing is that I didn't want to ruin this moment. It turns out that Sarah had a clear plan. I don't know what I was thinking. Of course, she had a plan. She seemed to have a plan for everything. Why should this case be an exception? It was this trait in her that aroused my ever-increasing admiration. Little did I know how much more I would admire her in the coming days. We barely had time to enter the room and close the door before Sarah pushed me against the wall and gave me a passionate, open kiss that lasted at least 10 minutes. I was instantly aroused, having not been with a woman since the last morning I was with Amy, a few hours before I met Sarah. Before the wedding, I had several women, but after not a single one. Sarah finally broke the kiss and told me to lie down on the bed. She needed to retreat to the bathroom for a while, but she would be back soon. I remained completely naked, realizing that there was no longer any doubt about where everything was leading. I tried to maintain my composure, to prolong this moment, to enjoy it as our first time, and not to let passion take over too quickly. Sarah came out of the bathroom, dressed only in black lace lingerie, and, looking into my eyes, slowly and confidently got rid of it. She then moved closer to me, sitting on top of me, wrapping her legs around me and taking full control of the situation. Her gaze was filled with unbridled desire. Her movements were graceful and passionate. Time seemed to dissolve. Each of her smooth and sensual gestures brought me to the edge, but I tried my best to hold on to prolong this moment. When I felt that she was close to climax, we intertwined our fingers, and a moment later a wave of delight came, sweeping away everything else. For a few seconds the world ceased to exist. When we finally came to our senses, our bodies were still trembling from the emotions we had experienced, and our breathing remained ragged. It was not just pleasure, it was a moment of complete intimacy and unity. After 45 minutes of hugging, kissing, and Sarah gushing about how much she missed real sex with her partner, we began round two. This time, Sarah played the role of the submissive. Taking a missionary position, she allowed me to take possession of her, and we indulged in a much less rapid, but deeper and more lasting passion. Sarah reached pleasure twice more before I couldn't hold back any longer. We fell asleep in each other's arms, not even thinking about being separated. Now I knew Sarah fully and understood what Jeff meant in our first conversation when he said that he knew what I had yet to know. In bed, Sarah was a real bomb. No wonder Jeff gave up chasing sexy co-eds and eventually settled down with her. Now I also understood why Jeff was so sure that his days were numbered. He simply could not keep up with her in bed anymore. At the same time, I realized the depth of Sarah's love and devotion to Jeff, as she had resisted the temptation to take a lover for years, despite her obvious dissatisfaction. I suddenly felt a new respect for her that I didn't expect. She really loved Jeff, and he, apparently, loved her too, since he was ready to give her this freedom. After a couple of days of barely leaving our room, we settled into a more balanced schedule. Sarah and I became inseparable. Every morning began with a joint workout, then breakfast, and in the afternoon, a swimming pool or a walk on the beach. We made love 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes in the shower, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the morning, and sometimes during the day, simply because we couldn't resist. Almost always before bed. It lasted 9 days straight, without a doubt, the best holiday of my life. We experienced so many new sensations that it is simply impossible to retell everything. But Sarah didn't forget about Jeff. Every afternoon, she would retire to the balcony or common area to video chat with him. I didn't know what exactly they were talking about, because their conversations remained private, and I respected that, considering how intimate moments Sarah and I shared these days. It wasn't clear to me how intense their conversations were. They couldn't help but be at least a little awkward in that situation, but Sarah never seemed upset afterward. On our last night on the island, we had a real marathon. We made love all night long. It seems that by this moment we had both completely lost our heads with each other, and anxiety was already beginning to creep in. How can we now cope with the surging feelings when we have to go home? All this time we lived as if on a honeymoon, but did we realize how powerful the emotions would be? How can we now sort them out and return to our previous lives? I thought that we would discuss this on the plane, but apparently, due to fatigue after a sleepless night, we simply slept almost the entire way. It was only in the last hour before landing that we finally began a conversation that could no longer be put off. Sarah, in case it wasn't obvious, I need to see you again. I was counting on it. She looked so innocent, back to being the demure Sarah I'd known her for the previous 8 months. So different from the passionate and uninhibited woman with whom I spent the last 10 days. Kyle, what do you think about moving into the spare bedroom in my house with Jeff and me? I think this is the craziest proposal I've ever heard. No, I wasn't even going to consider this option. Listen, I've been grateful to Jeff all week for the opportunity to be away from all the chaos that has reigned in our lives since his diagnosis. He remains steadfast and says I deserve it, and that the only thing he is grateful for is seeing me so happy. He says you can see it on my face. Believe me, I saw this glow too. He's not lying. I don't know what he expects next. Jeff realizes that the genie is already out of the bottle and can't be put back in. We do not deceive anyone, especially ourselves. Sarah, we can't do this to Jeff. It won't be able to compete with a new novel, especially one like ours. We both know he deserves better. What about what I deserve? You will get everything. I promise you this. Sarah gave me a broken smile and then pressed herself against my shoulder. I already knew how much I would miss these moments after landing. Sarah, you deserve time to truly reconnect with Jeff. I'd like to see you this weekend. Maybe even spend Friday or Saturday together. Or maybe we can spend both Friday and Saturday together. In your apartment, for example. Definitely for me. It was never a yours or mine conversation. We landed at Dulles Airport and began the long walk from the middle terminal to baggage claim. Once again, among people who could recognize us, we could no longer hold hands or show each other any affection. It felt surreal considering the connection we had felt just a moment ago. I decided to give Sarah real space to rebuild her relationship with Jeff and didn't text or call her for several days. In my heart of hearts, I expected her to contact me when she was ready. By Thursday morning, I still hadn't heard from her, and I was starting to miss her like crazy. I sent a message asking him to call me. A couple of hours later, her call came. Well, how is it? More difficult than I thought. For both of us. Damn, I'm completely torn. On Monday night, when Jeff and I were finally alone, I just collapsed on the floor in tears. And he, on the contrary, was completely impassive, and that's not like him. I'll take it with you somehow. Became a couple again. No, actually, not yet. Kyle, I miss you very much too. I have a storm of emotions. I won't be able to see you this weekend. I really want to, but I have to spend time with Jeff. He needs to know that he hasn't lost me, that we haven't lost us. It's hard. It's incredibly hard to hear this, but I understand. I promise that you will have everything. I guess what I meant was that you will have everything you want, just maybe not right away. Thank you, Kyle, for your understanding. I'm determined to figure this out as quickly as possible. I often think about the time we spent together last week. For me, this is a lot, but I intend to make sure that everything works out for us. I miss you. I'll be here when you're ready. I ended the call with an unbearable desire to hit my head against the wall. I felt incredibly stupid. So this is what it's like to date a married woman. All this uncertainty, will she come or not? And now I allowed myself to fall in love with a woman I would never get to call my own. She will not leave her husband, and I would never ask her to do so, knowing all the circumstances from the very beginning. It's been a year since my divorce from Amy, full of drama and difficulties with Jeff and Sarah. Outwardly, Jeff demonstrated confidence that Sarah could decide who, when, and how could be around her. In fact, I always knew that this was complete nonsense. Sarah made and then canceled our weekend dates at the last minute. Usually, it was because of unexpected things to do with Jeff, another university event, or something similar. However, we still spent a couple of weekends a month together and also sometimes met alone during the week, albeit completely randomly. I just got used to being surprised when she actually showed up and tried not to get too upset when another date fell through. But one thing I was definitely not disappointed in was Sarah as a lover. She was the best I've ever had. There were almost no taboo topics in our relationship, and I think that's what made me put up with all this mess. No matter how much it hurt because of the interrupted meetings, the sex as compensation was so incredible that I could not be angry with her for long. At the same time, I understood perfectly well that we had no path to a traditional relationship. She remained a married woman spending most of her time with her husband, and I continued to take second place. We did not discuss the possibility of my personal life outside of our meetings, although the thought of this began to come to me more and more often. I spent more and more time on dating apps, although it brought only disappointments and meetings with fake accounts. Eventually, I met Claire, a mother of 3 children under 12. Her successful husband recently left for another, equally successful woman, and together they became the new power couple in town. I don't know what made Claire swipe right, but I made it clear to her from the beginning that I had no plans to become a stepdad. I thought that after this communication would stop, but that didn't stop her. She was not looking for a serious relationship and could not afford a full-fledged boyfriend. During our first dinner, Claire herself suggested that we skip dessert and end the evening at my house. She, of course, was not such a lover as Sarah. Although Claire was younger than me and still attractive, despite the effects of 3 pregnancies, we had no problems in satisfying our desires. However, our meetings occurred infrequently on those weekends when her ex took the children, and if I did not have meetings with Sarah. I was incredibly careful, always using protection, because I was terribly afraid of making a mistake and ending up in a situation I never wanted. Luckily, I was able to avoid this mistake, but not all the complications associated with this relationship. Sarah and I were planning to attend the Potomac Tidal Basin Spring Cherry Blossom Festival, a traditional spring event in the Washington area, this coming weekend. The crowd of people ensured that we would definitely be seen by someone we knew, but our long tradition of avoiding public displays of affection in public places allowed me to hope that we would handle it responsibly. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when Sarah wrote on Friday morning that she would have to cancel the appointment, and made no secret of the fact that she would go to the festival with Jeff at his urgent request. Deep down, I always knew that this was complete nonsense. It seems Jeff is doing this to torment me, and Sarah is playing along with it. I used to get angry, but this time I just texted Claire to see if she had the kids for the weekend. There weren't any. No wonder we spent Friday and Saturday night in bed together. Claire was fast asleep at 9 a.m. on Sunday when I was awakened by a soft knock on the door. No wonder it was Sarah. Somehow I knew who it was even before I opened the door. "Good morning, Kyle." Surprised? "Yes." "Will you invite me in?" "Sarah, I have a guest. I didn't expect to see you this weekend. Sorry." Sarah recoiled a little, at first perhaps thinking it was a joke, then, seeing the serious expression on my face, she blushed, and a familiar look of concern flashed in her eyes that I had seen in her countless times before. I'm sorry. I need to leave." Sarah turned sharply and walked purposefully away. I didn't know what to say in this situation. Sooner or later, I was going to be caught red-handed, but I didn't feel like I had to apologize. Our relationship was never mutually exclusive, and I never felt the need to tell her that I was spending time with someone else while she attended to Jeff's needs. However, now I clearly had a problem. When I returned to the bedroom, Claire was already awake and looking at me with irritation. She knew that we were not in an exclusive relationship, so I did not hide who came to visit me. But it was unpleasant to start the day this way. Within 10 minutes, Claire got dressed and walked out the door, citing the fact that she was late picking up the children. I had a depressing feeling that I would never see her again. Sarah, without meaning to, always somehow ruined my relationships with others. But I hoped that the realization that I, too, had priorities other than our complicated relationship would not cause irreparable damage to the feelings that connected us. Sarah did not write to me on Sunday or during the day on Monday. It wasn't that unusual, but I wanted to clear things up. On Monday evening, we managed to go on a video call. "Sarah, I want to apologize for Sunday morning. This wouldn't have happened if I knew you were coming. Well, we were planning to spend this weekend together, so you can imagine that I didn't expect you to have other plans. Actually, I didn't have any other plans until you canceled our meeting to spend the weekend with your husband, Sarah. As I thought, in the end, it's my fault. Damn it. Sarah, this is not fair. You cancel a date with me for a weekend with your husband, And then you're surprised that I'm spending time with someone else. You know very well that I would rather be with you. And even despite the lack of any obligations in our relationship, I never used it as a tool of pressure. Look, I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry. I knew this was possible. I just didn't imagine you with someone else until I saw it with my own eyes. It was, like a bolt from the blue. I would like to unsee this, but I can't. Sarah, if it matters to you, I will finish everything. I realized how dear you are to me. I don't want to hurt you again. Kyle, I created this situation myself. I have no right to expect you to stop anything. I just need time to process it all. I didn't hear from Sarah on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I was worried. On Friday morning, she wrote, "I'll come to you in the evening. I hope this time you'll let me in." And I let her in. This was our first serious conflict. He could destroy us. Instead, the make-up sex was stunningly passionate. It was as if Sarah wanted to prove to me that no other woman could compare to her. Or perhaps this was her way of making amends for abandoning me for my husband last weekend. At that moment, I didn't care. On Sunday morning, realizing that the weekend was coming to an end, I decided to talk about the main thing. Sarah, you know that I'm madly in love with you. We cannot continue this emotional swing from insane happiness to complete despair. There must be a better way. I know it's my fault. Last weekend, I thought I might lose you, because she chose her husband over you. It seemed fair, until I saw with my own eyes that you deserved better than the way I treated you. I shouldn't have canceled our meeting. I shouldn't have thought that you would just wait for me, without any reason to expect my arrival. Jeff pushed the guilt by saying we wouldn't get back together, and I gave in. I allowed this situation to happen, and I have to change something. It's time for an intervention. It took place at a joint appointment with Dr. Campbell, where Sarah, Jeff, and I met. It was the first time I was face-to-face with her husband since Sarah and I became physical. Dr. Campbell willingly took on the role of moderator and set the tone of the meeting by asking a very simple question and waiting expectantly for us to answer. One by one, Jeff, Kyle, then Sarah, and in that order. I want each of you to explain as briefly as possible why you think we are here. Jeff, let's start with you. Why are we here today? Honestly, I don't know, Doctor, and I was hoping you would tell me. As far as I know, there were clear agreements between Kyle and I regarding Sarah, and as far as I understand, they have not changed or been broken. Sarah is free to make her decisions, and that was our mutual agreement. I felt like our relationship was better now than at any time since my diagnosis. I would be surprised and upset if this is not the case, given the freedom I gave Sarah and Kyle. Dr. Campbell nodded, taking notes. Kyle, what is your view of the situation? Why are we here? Because Sarah found herself in an impossible tug-of-war between the man she married and the man she fell in love with. I don't think she can bear the thought of disappointing either of us, and I'm not afraid to say directly what I think about it. I love Sarah too, and I'm sorry if this is somehow inappropriate to say in front of her husband. And it kills me to watch her suffer, torn between two men whom she clearly loves very much. I have no rights to her, and I can't blame Jeff for wanting all her time to be his. Only him? You ungrateful bastard. Jeff, please, no more interruptions when Kyle or Sarah are talking. I promise to give you time to speak. Dr. Campbell's voice was soft, hoping to reduce the intensity of our conversation, but the emotions were clear, and I could only imagine how the doctor was now making his money from this session. Kyle, thank you for sharing such strong feelings and being open about your love for Sarah, despite Jeff's presence. I'm sure it wasn't easy to express, and it wasn't easy for Jeff to hear. Let's try to respect each other's feelings during today's conversation. At the end of the day, we are all here with the intention of maintaining friendly relations, no matter what the outcome of this meeting is. Sarah, now it's your turn to say why you think we're here. Because I will never stop loving my husband, and, as a result, I put his emotional needs before my own. However, the events of the past year led me to develop equally strong feelings for Kyle, which began to form after we slept for the first time on Maui. Jeff claims that I decide how to spend my time, but he never fully accepted that this meant continuing to have a regular, intimate relationship with Kyle that was now impossible to replicate for himself. I'm in an impossible situation where I can't control my emotions, and I hate feeling terrible all the time trying to live up to the expectations of two demanding men. Sarah, I think you and I need to talk alone for a few minutes. Jeff, Kyle, can I count on you to remain friendly with each other in my private room? Jeff and I stood up silently and walked into Dr. Campbell's office. One thing. I asked you only one thing, not to destroy my marriage. Now look where we are, Kyle. Did you have your prostate removed or your ears removed, Jeff? Didn't you hear Sarah say she loves you and continues to put your needs before hers and mine? Damn, buddy, no one is trying to break up your marriage. You spend almost all your time with her. You get her best sides and only you. It doesn't matter how many nights she sleeps in my bed. It's never been my concern what happens in your bedroom. Like me, what's going on in yours? I rolled my eyes. Well, who were we trying to fool? We both knew exactly what was going on and what wasn't. We sat in tense silence for half an hour until Dr. Campbell invited us back to the general session. Kyle, Jeff, thank you for letting Sarah and I talk alone. I think it was helpful, and now she has something she wants to share with you. Sarah, listen, men, there are two of you, and I am alone. In such circumstances, it is simply impossible to expect that you yourself will come to an agreement about how we spend our time. This means that now I will make the final decision. I am confident that it will be fair, and I will remain open to compromise. But from today on, any disputes will be resolved by me, and my word will be the last. Jeff and I looked at each other, and then looked at Sarah at the same time. I have to admit, I love her just like that dominant. Seeing her in this image made me feel excited in a way that Jeff no longer could. From now on, I will be spending Friday and Saturday nights with Kyle. Jeff has the right to request a weekend in advance once a month that we will spend together. In exchange, Kyle and I will meet one weekday before this weekend and one weekday after to make up for lost time. It's still 5 nights a week with Jeff. I hope he finds this more than fair, I interjected, realizing that this was a much better option for me than before. Wait, Kyle, I'm not finished yet. Jeff, I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you, both in everyday life and in our bedroom. But we both know that things will never be the same again. I need you to finally accept this and feel confident that I will never leave you. Jeff nodded. What about Kyle? Kyle, you came into my life unexpectedly and taught me things I didn't even know existed. You filled the void that was left by Jeff's illness, and yes, I can admit that I am crazy about you. Finding you with another woman in your apartment broke my heart. We didn't discuss exclusivity, and perhaps that was an unreasonable expectation given our situation and my inconsistency with you. But today it ends. I expect complete sexual fidelity from you from now on. Jeff grinned as if I was finally getting what I deserved. I looked straight into Sarah's eyes. Sarah, you are everything I ever wanted in a woman and partner. I agree to your condition of fidelity in exchange for your commitment to spend time with me every week. Dr. Campbell announced that our session was over and his next pair was already waiting outside the door. I gently kissed Sarah in front of Jeff, breaking the kiss with, "See you Friday, honey." I'm probably still that asshole after all. I expected the drama to continue. Hints from Jeff during the 5 nights he spent with Sarah, cancellations, or rescheduling of meetings on my days off. But this did not happen. There was a certain calm between Jeff and I as competitors, and Sarah managed schedules and expectations flawlessly. I didn't ask her about her nights with Jeff or about their life together in general. Apart from the fact that Sarah and I rarely appeared together in public, our weekend remained as enjoyable and eventful as our first trip. I admired the way Sarah dealt with her feelings and how she remained accessible even during her days with Jeff. I didn't see her and tried not to disturb her, but sometimes her messages or discussions of our plans made it clear that I did not disappear from her thoughts, even when distance separated us. This stability continued for the next 3 years. We even developed an unlikely handover ritual at the same restaurant where I first met Jeff when I was divorcing Amy. I think we felt comfortable there. It was one of the few public places where the staff seemed aware of our unusual situation, but never asked questions or openly judged us. I was sitting at our usual table with a bottle of red wine when Jeff and Sarah walked in together. At 49, Sarah hasn't changed much since we met. Jeff, on the other hand, looked every bit his 64 years, but together they still looked like a respectable couple, even walking and holding hands. Dinner was standard for us, including dessert, and conversation flowed easily. The three of us shared the events of the past work week. After the bill was paid, Sarah and I quietly excused ourselves and left together. Now we looked like a couple, just as naturally as Jeff and Sarah 2 hours ago, only without obvious displays of affection in public. Before our trip to Maui, Sarah got a newlywed for 5 years. At her age, pregnancy seemed unlikely, but not impossible, so it was just one less thing to worry about for both of us. This made her cycle predictable, so predictable that it almost always started on a Friday or Saturday. I've joked about this for years, but it never really bothered me. Out sheets didn't survive the weekend anyway. However, recently her cycle has become irregular. I didn't even notice, but Sarah complained to her doctor tonight. She was told that this was perimenopause and that she would experience various side effects in the coming weeks and months. After going through Amy's abrupt chemical menopause 5 years ago, I had reason to feel anxious, but I was hopeful that the natural process would be less daunting. On Monday, I was diving into another long work week as a single man when the phone rang. A familiar name appeared on the screen: Jerry Sivers, my lawyer. Kyle, long time no see. Hope you are fine. Still single or what? Still single, Jerry. Well, not exactly. I have the same girlfriend, but yes. Is this a business call or just chat? I'm afraid it's business, Kyle. I have a request made through your ex-wife Amy's lawyer. She wants to meet you. Do you know what this is about, Jerry? She didn't say. The agreement required us to be notified if Amy passed away or remarried, both of which would stop child support. So, if this is not the case, I can only assume that the issue is related to health. Amy. I haven't thought about her since the divorce. My days were free, and between work and training, I made significant progress in self-improvement. My bank account was fuller than ever, thanks to a professional trick, and so to speak, I looked even better than the last time she saw me. As much as I wanted to be vindictive, I hadn't seen or spoken to Amy in almost 5 years. I was preparing to see a very different version of my ex-wife, one that would certainly not compare to me or what I had accomplished since her. But I was also worried maybe she has cancer again, and if so, am I prepared to deal with this and the consequences it may entail? After the divorce, Amy literally disappeared. She sold our house, and I assumed she moved to New Jersey to be closer to her mother. But I didn't really know. Maybe she was somewhere around all this time. I just didn't care. Our mutual friends took her side after the divorce because she happily exposed me in the eyes of others as an unscrupulous traitor who left his wife, a cancer survivor, for someone better. This was another reason for my anger towards her. We agreed through our lawyers to meet on Tuesday at 10 a.m. at a chain of coffee shops not far from our former home. Amy changed her phone number after the breakup, and I couldn't contact her directly. I arrived at 9:45, prepared for any eventuality, assuming that she most likely did not look her best. But when Amy walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, I was stunned. It looks like the cancer either hasn't returned or hasn't affected her at all. I never forgot how attractive she was, but like me, she only seemed to get prettier over the years. I stood up and she gestured to the cash register. I raised my cup to indicate that I had already ordered. It was one of those subtle routines that couples take for granted when your wife knows how you drink your coffee. I wasn't sure how to act in this situation, but I felt the need to stand up when she approached the table and automatically opened my arms. It was awkward, but at the same time surprisingly familiar. It seemed to relax both of us. Amy sat down and got straight to the point. Kyle, I'm sorry that I haven't contacted you for so long. It took me a long time to understand my emotions after my divorce. Amy, you look amazing. Glad to see you're taking such good care of yourself. Thank you, darling. That's good to hear. These 5 years have been a series of ups and downs for me. Don't speak. Kyle, I need to explain something to you, and maybe apologize. I was selfish and probably misguided in pursuing a divorce so fiercely. I needed therapy to realize and admit this first to myself and now to you. Well, I agree that your insistence on divorce was a delusion, but that's in the past. Is that what we're here for, Amy? Or is there something else? Amy settled back into her chair, clearly preparing to say something more. Kyle, after the divorce was finalized, I decided that now it was my turn to take revenge. I thought that I still looked quite attractive, despite some restrictions. After 20 years of marriage, I was curious to know if I could still attract men. I looked at her silently, sipping my coffee. Something was wrong here. I didn't trust her. I had 3 serious relationships in the first year, all with high-level men. You know, the thing I was most worried about, especially the first time, was when I had to open up about breast cancer. Well, I mean, it was impossible to hide it. As soon as a man saw me in the bedroom, the scars became obvious. And if it went further, then, well, certain instructions were required. I was so embarrassed about it. But you know what? Every one of them was sincere and understanding, especially when I told them that I left my husband because he could no longer deliver those emotions. It was like your accelerated bonus program. I didn't even have to ask. They themselves began to try their best. And God, how my body reacted to it, especially at the very beginning. Amy, what are you getting at? Somehow it didn't immediately dawn on me that the reason for our divorce was a lack of pleasure. I thought I was just a cheating asshole. Be patient. I promise it will be even better. My first relationship lasted 3 months. Honestly, I don't think he tried any less. I just got bored and started pretending everything. He hinted that we should move in together, and I just stopped reacting to see how he would react. I didn't want to get stuck in a long-term relationship again with someone like you who couldn't make it to the finish line with me. One day, he simply disappeared without explanation. No calls, no messages. He simply disappeared. This must have come as a shock to you, Amy. No one would ever say, I thought to myself. Then I tried again with 2 others. It was always just incredible in the beginning. Well, of course, I no longer got the same pleasure from sex as when we were younger and healthier, but the newness, I didn't even understand what I was missing. But as soon as the novelty wore off, my excitement for these men went with it. Do you men have a sixth sense for this? Everyone just evaporated. I realized that it would always be like this and fell into a deep depression. It took me almost 18 months of therapy before I could even think about dating again. But even then, I didn't really want it. Didn't want to date men? This is a story from Amy that I will believe, I chuckled. She rolled her eyes. It seemed that she had not forgotten how to notice my sarcasm either. It was the therapist who helped me realize that none of this was your fault, Kyle. At that moment, I forgave you. I never had the courage to say it, but for the first time since the day I found you at the marquee with that woman of easy virtue, I was ready to forgive your infidelity. Sarah Hamilton. This prostitute is still my girlfriend, Amy. Maybe you remember that I try to maintain relationships, even if they are not ideal. Now I was ready to sink my claws into her. Oh yes, Sarah, exactly. She was married then, right? Did she even leave her elderly husband for you? Amy narrowed her eyes, and her grin was undisguised. Knowing her past antics, I had little doubt that she was well aware of everything that happened between me and Sarah. Why are we discussing all this today, Amy? I'm not finished yet, dear. It turns out that the best relationships are not where you are looking for them. At the urging of my therapist, I signed up for a support group for breast cancer survivors. Everyone came there, those who had recently fallen ill, those who had been living with it for many years, and even some terminal patients who were trying to buy themselves a little more time. That's where I met George. George? My fiancé, George Nelson. Amy raised her left hand and twirled the wedding ring on her finger, which she had been hiding in her palm all this time. I think I should congratulate you, or is this the real reason for our meeting? Well, you can say that. Yes, after 2 years together, George and I decided to legalize our relationship. He has already gone through the process of loss. You see, his wife, Melissa, died of breast cancer. I could not even think that a person who had gone through such a tragedy would again dare to marry a woman who had the same diagnosis. But then I still didn't know who George was. Sounds like George really is special. I am glad that you have found someone close to each other, a person who understands you through common experience, through the tragedy you have experienced. You both need someone special. We all need it. Amy narrowed her eyes and lowered her voice. Do you think George is just a companion for me? Ha ha ha. Kyle, do you really believe that a man would have asked me down the aisle if we hadn't slept together? You said to yourself that sex is boring for you without novelty. Why did he stay with you for 2 years and only now called you to replace his dead wife? It's not just about George and me, it's about Melissa. She and George married at 40 and had only been together for 5 years before her diagnosis. They were crazy about each other until treatment took from Melissa what it takes from everyone. It took away their intimate life. I've heard this before somewhere. Only in their case, no one was ready to come to terms with it. Despite chemotherapy, hormonal suppression, and surgeries, George and Melissa remained close. At first it was her initiative, but then it became their norm because George never stopped looking for ways to bring newness to their relationship. They did this several times a week until her last days. Amy was smiling now. So my child support payments will end next month. I hope old George makes up for your loss. I didn't need the money, you probably knew that. I took alimony purely out of revenge because you were so desperate to run away from our marriage in order to rush into an affair with Sarah that you signed up for everything I offered. What does George give you that I couldn't give you? Experience. He is a master of his craft. George never, ever leaves me unsatisfied. He is the lover I so desperately missed, and you didn't even try to be him. But I forgive you for that, Kyle. I have George, and you have Sarah. Well, at least for the weekend, so I was told. For me, the conversation was over. I stood up, gave Amy the middle finger, and headed out. I couldn't get out of this cafe fast enough. Damn, Amy was an icy bitch. She is no longer the loving woman I married 25 years ago. That Amy died. I didn't recognize her anymore, and I swore that I would never speak to her again. Things may have been looking up for Amy, but the following weeks weren't so rosy for Sarah. She was experiencing difficulties associated with menopause, not so much in a sexual sense, but in classic manifestations: body pain, night sweats, hot flashes, etc. I felt like our sex life had cooled down a bit, but perhaps the fact that we were still only spending 2 consecutive evenings a week together protected us from the full impact of the natural decline in her hormones. Unlike Amy, Sarah, being a healthy person free of cancer, could receive hormone replacement therapy. She found an amazing doctor who put her on bioidentical estrogen and progesterone and recommended a testosterone implant to support her mood and libido. The results were not immediate, but over time they significantly alleviated her most acute symptoms. This, of course, had a positive effect on her enthusiasm in the bedroom. She again became the same lighter she was when we first met. It's strange how many things seem insignificant until they disappear. So Amy moved on with George and Sarah, and I remained in a healthy relationship. But unfortunately, things were about to change for Jeff, and not for the better. It seemed that after a long period of stability, events began to develop too rapidly. I knew something was wrong that weekend when Sarah spent the entire Friday dinner being uncharacteristically protective of Jeff. He barely touched his food and looked distant as the three of us tried to maintain a clearly strained conversation. Sarah and I barely had time to leave the restaurant and get into the car when she suddenly burst into tears. What's happened? Sarah, tell me what's wrong. Jeff went to the doctor for a routine checkup this week. He had a PSA blood test done to confirm that the disease remained in remission. For the past 6 years, results have been stable at 0.00%, but this time the figure was 0.32%. I don't understand what this means. He was scheduled for a repeat test in 2 weeks to find out if it was just a mistake. But after the prostate is removed, the level of PSA prostate-specific antigen should decrease and remain as close to zero as possible. That's what Jeff did. If the number rises again, it usually means the cancer has returned and treatment needs to be restarted. This weekend with Sarah was difficult. She decided not to cancel our plans because she needed a distraction, since her home was in complete chaos. However, on Sunday morning, she was still the first to leave. A repeat test 2 weeks later showed 0.54%. The result was unambiguous and, according to the doctor, tended to increase. This was a common type of relapse, Jeff was assured, and the doctors knew what to do. Unfortunately, what to do meant a combination of androgen deprivation therapy and radiation therapy, which could last anywhere from a year to 2 years. Jeff did not resist treatment, despite the many debilitating side effects. In the first months, Sarah and I spent much less time together as she was forced to take on the role of caregiver. Over time, the acute phase of the side effects subsided a little, and Sarah and I returned to our usual rhythm of weekend meetings. I had never thought about how Sarah and Jeff's relationship developed in the context of our long-term intimate union. It was one of those boundaries that we never crossed. I simply assumed that what happened in my bedroom stayed in it, and accordingly, I did not interfere in Jeff's personal life. Perhaps it was naive to think that Sarah did not continue to be close to her husband, even if their intimate life was very different from ours. One day, while discussing Jeff's condition and his response to treatment, Sarah burst into tears and admitted that any attempts at intimacy between them had ceased. Jeff had simply lost all interest. I saw this before with Amy. Sex hormones have a powerful influence on behavior. It's no surprise that Jeff lost interest during therapy. I never stopped being close to Jeff until this moment. Of course, this is not at all the same as between us, I know you understand. But it was important to me that he and I still had this closeness as a couple. Now I can't even fall asleep in his arms, he's too uncomfortable. He needs you differently now, Sarah. It's easy to lose sight of this. He knows that your need for intimacy is being met, and I think he still finds comfort in this, since after so many years he has not said a word against it. I think so too. Your relationship continues to evolve. You have been together for decades. You should be proud that you stayed with each other, despite illnesses, age differences, and all the obvious reasons why you could have separated. While Jeff's hormones and sex drive were fading, Sarah experienced the opposite. She fully adapted to life after menopause. Our meetings became much less intermittent. Now she was not tormented by sudden tides at the height of passion. We started spending 1 or 2 more nights a week together, in addition to the usual weekends. Jeff continued to teach at the university, and his schedule was shifted to afternoons and evenings as he was unwell in the mornings and needed morning radiotherapy treatments. Being a tenure-track professor certainly had its advantages, and Sarah and I started having dinner in the evenings when he was in class, like an ordinary couple. Sometimes such evenings ended in an overnight stay, sometimes she returned home. The decision was always hers. This sometimes upset me, but I never insisted. Over time, this became the norm, and Sarah increasingly wanted to stay with me rather than at home with Jeff. Some people by that time already knew about our relationship, but there were also those, even those close to me, who still had no idea that I had been in a relationship with a married woman for a long time. One of these serene evenings, while we were having dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, everything suddenly changed. One of Jeff's graduate students, a teaching assistant, burst into the room. He ran up to our table. Apparently, Sarah recognized him, but I didn't. As indeed, he did me. Sarah, I've been looking everywhere for you. We need to leave immediately. The intonation in her voice was palpable. Something was wrong. Either she couldn't tell or she didn't know. Sarah looked at me with her usual worried look, and we immediately left the restaurant. The teaching assistant had a car and took us to Jeff's office on campus. When we arrived, a worried administrator stood at the entrance and campus emergency lights flashed all around. The administrator's expression was grim. By that time, it seems to me that Sarah had already guessed everything. It was on the sidewalk that she learned that a group of assistants had gone looking for Jeff after he failed to show up for an evening lecture. They found him at his desk, cold and lifeless. Jeff was taken to hospital but never regained consciousness and was not resuscitated upon arrival. Sarah was shocked and depressed. She collapsed into my arms, and all I could do was just hold her up, helping her not to fall. Eventually, she managed to sit down in a chair, and I had to explain to those around me that I was close friends with both Jeff and Sarah and could take care of her. Some of the looks seemed curious to me, but I didn't care. It's amazing how long we managed to keep our relationship a secret. But that didn't matter now. Her husband had just died suddenly. Androgen therapy, which Jeff received, is known to be harmful to the heart, despite its effectiveness in fighting cancer. An autopsy showed that he died of a heart attack, which was in no way related to oncology. Sarah was completely unprepared for his sudden death. I did everything I could to help organize the funeral. The ceremony took 10 days to prepare, and the university eventually held a public memorial service for students and staff. Jeff had no children, so Sarah took center stage, surrounded by university administrators who supported her and honored her husband's memory. I stood in line with hundreds of other people to express my condolences. Perhaps some were surprised that Sarah hugged me much longer than the others. But I didn't care. I just wanted her to feel supported despite the awkwardness of the situation. Sarah needed time to get over her loss. Ironically, now that her husband was gone, there was nothing stopping us from being open together. However, we spent less time with each other than ever. I didn't insist, although after the first 2 nights we spent together without a hint of sex, I simply supported her emotionally. We saw each other only occasionally for almost 3 weeks. Sarah was busy organizing the funeral and sorting out Jeff's complicated inheritance. We talked on the phone every day, but it was only in the 4th week that she cautiously suggested spending the weekend with me. I didn't assume anything. Of course, I hoped to take Jeff's place in her life, but I didn't want to rush her or interfere with the grieving process. Everything went as usual. We continued to meet on weekends, but in public Sarah acted as if nothing had changed between us. It was too early for her to be out on the town with a new partner, so any official acknowledgement of our relationship had to be put on hold. 3 months later, something changed in her. Sarah began to come out of her depression by accepting what had happened. One day, at Sunday breakfast, she started talking about our future. "I think it's time." "Time for what?" "It's time for you to move out of your apartment and move in with me. We've kept each other at a distance for too long and life is too short. What are we waiting for? I've wanted to be with you almost every night since we spent time in Maui, and now we have that chance. Come live with me." "Not so fast," I replied. "If we're really going to do this, I want it to be right. Of course, I only want to be with you, but I can't live with you in the house you shared with Jeff. Sorry. You can stay there as long as you need, and you can come to me whenever you want. But if we are going to build a future together, we need to find a new home just ours, a place where there will be no memories of the past." I saw a feeling of rejection flash in her eyes. Apparently, she wasn't thinking about selling the house. Perhaps I put too much pressure on her, but I simply could not imagine our life in the house where she lived with her late husband. If we really were going to have a future together, I was willing to wait until she was ready. It didn't happen right away, but gradually Sarah spent more and more time in my apartment. I started calling it our apartment. By the anniversary of Jeff's death, we were already looking for a new home together. She wasn't ready to sell her old one yet, but clearly wanted to move into her own place where we could live together. Around this time, we stopped hiding our relationship. Some of our close friends knew the truth for a long time, but the rest had to either accept or live with rumors that we were together before Jeff died. By the 2nd year after his death, Sarah and I had been together for almost 10 years, both formally and informally. Without further ado, I said I wanted to marry her. We'd both been through big weddings in the past, so we had a very simple wedding at the county courthouse on Friday with just a few close friends. I put a diamond ring and anniversary wedding band on her finger, leaving the simple gold ring she wore with Jeff. I was never frightened by her feelings for her late husband if he was not a threat to me during life. Then he certainly could not become one after death. But we spent our honeymoon as we dreamed of, a ski resort in Utah. We stopped in Denver along the way, had a couple glasses of wine at the airport, and then headed to a local hotel where we spent the night reminiscing about the day we met almost 10 years ago. We indulged in passion as if it was our first time together. End of story. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.